Some acts of kindness are small, forgotten in the vast emptiness of space. A shared meal, a moment of silence. But what if the smallest act of compassion could change the destiny of an entire galaxy? What if the fate of an empire rested on the shoulders of a man who didn't even know he was in a fight? This is the story of a janitor, a runaway, and a simple sandwich that started it all. The silence aboard Titan VII was a living thing. It was a deep, resonant hum that settled into the bones, a constant companion in the station's endless, sterile corridors. For Elias, it was the sound of his life. As a janitor on the night shift, he was a ghost in this magnificent machine, a silent witness to the station's deep sleep. By day, Titan VII was a river of diverse life, a bustling hub of commerce that connected a dozen star systems. But at 0300 hours, it was just a museum of echoes. The phantom laughter from closed entertainment arcades, the ghost of hurried footsteps from the day shift, the silent screams of 1,000 different lives rushing past, too busy to notice the man who cleaned up the world they left behind. Elias guided his auto-sanitizer drone, a low-slung whirring disc he had affectionately named Walter, down the vast expanse of the Grand Concourse. The floor, a polished obsidian-like composite, reflected the cold, distant stars visible through the massive arching viewport. He wasn't just a janitor. He was the quiet curator of this silent world, finding a certain satisfaction in the simple act of restoring order to the day's chaos. His work was a series of small, unseen kindnesses. He would spot the glint of a dropped data chip, its surface holding someone's precious memories, and place it carefully in the lost and found depository. He'd leave a single drop of high-grade lubricant on the creaking joint of an old, forgotten maintenance droid that everyone else ignored, a quiet acknowledgement of a fellow creature of the night shift. These were the small rituals that gave his anonymous existence a sliver of meaning. There were echoes in his own soul, too, faint, hazy memories of a bustling kitchen on Earth, the warmth of a family now distant, the sharp metallic taste of a failure so profound it had sent him fleeing to the anonymity of space. He had come to Titan VII, seeking refuge in its vast, uncaring emptiness, a place where no one knew his name or the story of the life he had left behind. He had succeeded. Here, he was just the janitor, a part of the station's background hum as unnoticed and as essential as the life support system itself. He told himself he preferred it that way. Anonymity was a shield, a comfortable cloak against the complexities of connection. The loneliness was a familiar ache, not a sharp pain, but a dull, constant pressure in his chest that he had long since learned to live with. As Walter the drone made a final, sweeping pass across the concourse, leaving a gleaming, perfect surface in its wake, Elias paused. He leaned against his cart, looking out the viewport at the distant, swirling nebula, a beautiful, violent cloud of creation and destruction. He often wondered if anyone else, in their rush from one destination to the next, ever truly stopped to see it, or if it was all just wallpaper for their busy lives. He was a small, insignificant gear in this grand cosmic clock, a fact he had accepted years ago. But on this particular night, as the station held its breath in the deep silence between shifts, another lost soul was about to drift into his quiet orbit, and the echoes of emptiness were about to be replaced by a sound that would change the course of his life forever. Elias had just powered down Walter, his reliable auto-sanitizer drone, and was preparing for the long, quiet walk back to the low-tier residential blocks when he heard it. It wasn't a sound of the station, not the metallic groan of the superstructure, nor the distant whir of a cargo lift. It was a sound that was fundamentally out of place, a soft, almost choked-off sob. He paused, his hand hovering over the control panel. On Titan VII, silence was the rule, but this sound was a break in the fabric of his meticulously ordered night. He waited, his loneliness momentarily replaced by a prickle of caution. The sobbing came again, quieter this time, betraying a fear of being discovered. Elias pushed his maintenance cart slowly, quietly, down a narrow, seldom-used service corridor that ran adjacent to the main transport lines. This part of the station was a maze of deactivated cargo containers, stacked high and casting long, oppressive shadows under the sparse, utilitarian lights. He found the source of the sound huddled behind a stack of crates marked fragile xenobotanical samples. It was a small, slender figure, curled into a tight ball. Elias's professional detachment instantly dissolved. This was no ordinary trespasser. The figure was clearly alien, far too small to be an adult, and covered in clothing that looked like discarded ill-fitting scraps of synthetic fabric. The skin, wherever it was visible, was a pale, opalescent shade of blue, shimmering faintly, and the head was dominated by large almond-shaped eyes that were filled with an ancient, profound terror. They were the eyes of a creature cornered, completely devoid of hope. Elias recognized the species only vaguely from a brief flash on the news feeds. Ceruleans, a highly advanced race from near the galactic core. What a Cerulean child, or what he assumed was a child, was doing alone and weeping in the service corridors of a human-operated station was a mystery that screamed of danger. He knew he should report it. Protocol dictated immediate notification of security for any unauthorized presence, especially a xenotype. But as he looked at the sheer vulnerability of the small shivering form, a different protocol, one etched into the deeper, older parts of the human soul, took precedence. He reached into his simple, insulated lunchbox. It contained a plain whole-grain sandwich, packed with a simple protein spread, and a crisp red earth apple. It was his entire meal for the night, and he had looked forward to it. Without a word, without making any sudden moves that might increase her panic, he placed the open lunchbox gently on the cold floor a few feet from her. He then took a deliberate step back, turning his attention to his work cart, pretending to examine its wheels. He gave her space and silence, the two things he knew best. The silence hung between them, thick with the unasked questions and the profound gravity of his simple, dangerous choice. He could feel her silver eyes watching him, the air thick with her doubt. He waited, his heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm against his ribs. The moment stretched, an uncomfortable eternity, measured by the rhythmic flicker of the overhead fluorescent lights. Elias kept his back turned to the huddled alien girl, methodically checking the seals on his cleaning supplies, allowing her absolute control over the situation. He did not breathe. He did not move. He waited for her to run, to scream, or to simply vanish back into the station's shadows, but she did none of those things. After what felt like an hour, he heard a small, almost inaudible sniffle, followed by a barely perceptible scraping sound. She had moved. A minute later, the soft crunch of the earth apple being bitten into broke the tension. Elias let out a slow, silent breath. The hunger, it seemed, was stronger than the fear. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The girl, still curled tightly, was eating the sandwich with a controlled, almost desperate speed. Her four-fingered hands, delicate and trembling, clutched the bread as if it were the most precious object in the universe. Her eyes never left him, a constant silent beam of silver observation. When she finished the sandwich, she held the crisp red apple in her hands, turning it slowly. Elias felt a brief, unexpected wave of pride. It was a perfect apple. She finally took a small, cautious bite. At the sudden burst of flavor, her large eyes widened slightly, and a faint, almost invisible pattern on her opalescent skin seemed to brighten for a moment. It was a fleeting, nonverbal expression of pleasure that transcended language, and it was a moment of profound connection for Elias. He felt a small, genuine smile touch his lips. Simple food, simple joy. When the last bite of the apple was gone, she meticulously placed the core and the crumpled napkin back into the lunchbox. It was a gesture of respect and control that told Elias she was clearly not feral. She was lost, but not abandoned. She then sat back, her knees drawn up, her silver eyes now holding a different expression, not just fear, but a searching, quiet gratitude, mixed with deep, lingering exhaustion. The silence returned, but it was no longer thick with terror. It was now a shared, intimate quiet, a silence built on a shared meal and a common, unspoken understanding. Elias finally turned to her fully, leaning against his cart. He didn't ask her name or where she came from. He simply looked at her, his own loneliness acknowledging hers. He should leave. His shift was technically over. He should go home, eat his dinner, the dinner he was now missing, and get some sleep. But looking into those wide silver eyes, seeing the sheer bone-deep weariness that clung to her small frame, he knew he couldn't leave her to the inevitable, cold efficiency of the station's security sweep. She was still sitting there, a small, fragile blue flame in the darkness, and she was waiting for him. He made his choice, his personal protocol once again overruled by the small, stubborn core of human kindness. He picked up his lunchbox, nodded to her, and simply sat down on the cold floor himself. The echoes of emptiness were silenced by the presence of another soul. The subsequent days melted into a routine built on trust, silence, and simple acts of human kindness. Elias had moved Lyra, the name he had given her in his mind for her quiet grace, into a rarely used, perfectly sealed storage closet near an abandoned ventilation shaft. It was dark, climate-controlled, and crucially, off the official security map. He had smuggled her supplies, a thick thermal space blanket, a discarded data pad preloaded with classic human literature and logic puzzles, and a few containers of nutrient paste, just in case. But it was his daily visit, his nightly ritual of bringing a hot meal, that truly mattered. His apron now held not just cleaning supplies, but extra sandwiches, warm fruit compote, and the occasional piece of chocolate, all things he carefully prepared in his tiny apartment kitchen. This simple, dangerous secret was the most meaningful thing he had done since leaving Earth. Their relationship deepened in the absence of words. Lyra communicated primarily through her large, expressive silver eyes and the subtle changes in the iridescent patterns that shifted across her pale blue skin. When she was comfortable, the patterns would ripple with a soft, pulsing light. When anxious, they would dim or become erratic. She never spoke a word of English or any other common galactic tongue, but she began to leave things for Elias. Small, intricately woven patterns scratched into the thermal blanket, or complex, elegant geometric designs drawn on the data pad. They weren't just drawings, they were diagrams, flowing schematics of incredible complexity that hinted at a civilization far beyond human comprehension. Elias understood none of it, but he respected the artistry and the intelligence. He would acknowledge them with a gentle nod and a reassuring smile, his own loneliness momentarily lifted by her presence. The cloak of anonymity that Elias had so carefully constructed for himself now covered Lyra as well. He became hyper-aware of his surroundings, his movements precise and deliberate. His mind, once lost in the mundane repetition of his routine, was now sharp, focused, a sentry always alert for danger. He learned the rhythm of the station's security patrols, the frequency of the maintenance sweeps, and the exact times when certain cameras cycled down for recharging. He was no longer just the janitor. He was the guardian of a small, precious secret, and that transformation gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. Lyra, for her part, began to show tiny, almost imperceptible signs of affection, the slightest tilt of her head when he arrived, the softest touch of her four-fingered hand to his sleeve when he was about to leave. In these small, fragile moments their bond grew, rooted not in shared culture or language, but in a shared silence and a profound act of trust. Yet the question of her identity remained a vast, dark unknown, a dangerous piece of the puzzle that was about to find its way into the light. The quiet rhythm of their shared secret was shattered on the 9th night. Elias was making his rounds near the diplomatic sector, an area he usually avoided when he saw them. They were not the usual station security, nor were they the common mix of off-world traders and diplomats he occasionally encountered. These were professionals. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency that bespoke high-level military training. They were a squad of 3, xenotypes of a different species, tall, lean, and covered in sleek black segmented armor that absorbed light and sound, making them seem like moving shadows. Their faces, visible through clear angular visors, were cold, predatory, and devoid of visible emotion. Elias froze, becoming instantly invisible in a maintenance alcove. He recognized the armor's design from old war reports and black market chatter, the Cathar hegemony, an infamous, brutal, and highly militaristic empire from the Outer Rim. They were not treaty-bound or diplomatic. They were here for one purpose: to hunt. He listened as they paused near a data terminal. The Cathar commander, his voice a series of dry, sharp clicks that the station's intercom barely picked up, was giving orders. The asset is a xenotype female. Estimated size, 1.2 meters. High value. Status is runaway asset. Elias's blood ran cold. Runaway asset. Not a child, not a civilian, but a piece of stolen property of immense importance. The Cathar had a reputation for brutality that made the space pirates look like choir boys. He followed them, staying deep in the station's blind spots. The commander pulled up a grainy, low-resolution image on a wall display. Even through the blur, Elias instantly recognized the unique, iridescent pattern of Lyra's pale blue skin. She wasn't just a runaway, she was their target. He saw the cold intensity in the commander's eyes as he addressed the station's head of security, an arrogant human official named Captain Hedges. "This asset," the Cathar commander clicked, "is a matter of imperial security. We have reason to believe she is hiding in a low-value sector. You will give us absolute unrestricted access to all service corridors and maintenance logs. Any cooperation with the asset will be treated as an act of war against the hegemony." Hedges, visibly intimidated, stammered out his compliance. Elias realized the depth of the danger. The Cathar had bypassed all diplomatic channels and were operating with the full, terrified compliance of the station's command. The commander then spoke a single phrase that pierced Elias's carefully constructed shell of indifference. "Find the royal sigil. That is the priority." A royal sigil. The Cathar were hunting a political prize, a figure of immense, possibly royal importance. The stakes had just been raised from a simple rescue to a galactic incident. Elias knew he had mere hours before the Cathar's systematic sweep would lead them directly to his hidden storage closet. He was no longer just protecting a lost child, he was shielding a political asset from a military empire. He had to move her, and this time, his knowledge of the station would not be enough. He needed a miracle, and he needed it now. The shield of anonymity he had spent years building was about to be burned away. The frantic cold sweat rush of pure adrenaline was a feeling Elias hadn't experienced since his days as a cook on a battle frigate. He raced back through the maintenance tunnels, his uniform sticking to his back, the hum of the station now sounding like a ticking clock. He didn't use the regular transport tubes. He relied on the antiquated service tunnels, dusty, forgotten conduits only known to the engineering and cleaning staff. When he reached the storage closet, he pulled Lyra into his arms. Her skin was cold with fear, and her iridescent patterns were dim and frantic. He didn't waste time explaining. He conveyed the absolute urgency of the moment through the sheer force of his presence and his desperate look. He grabbed the space blanket and the data pad. "No more," he whispered, his voice rough. "We have to go." His military training, buried deep beneath years of mopping floors, resurfaced. He moved with a precision and economy of motion that belied his civilian status. He led Lyra down a decommissioned waste chute, a vertical drop that ended in the sub-level utility nexus, an area so contaminated with minor radiation leaks and obsolete machinery that no one, especially Cathar mercenaries, would ever willingly enter. The stench of stale grease and ozone was overwhelming. Lyra, surprisingly, made no sound of protest. She clung to his cleaning uniform, her silent trust a heavier burden than any cargo he had ever hauled. This was the ultimate test of his unique knowledge, using the station's own forgotten systems against its new masters. Their movement was a dance of shadows and light. They navigated through tight crawl spaces beneath the main fusion reactor, where the air was hot and thrummed with raw energy. Elias had to use a specific arcane set of override codes he had learned years ago from an old drunken engineering droid, to open a sealed maintenance hatch leading to the cargo loading bay. He was a master of the station's low-level systems, the true janitor's empire, and he used that mastery to perfection. He bypassed security sensors by using the exact frequency of the cargo bay's ambient electromagnetic field to mask their heat signature. They were mere feet from the main cargo loading platform, a bustling, well-lit area now crawling with Kentar search teams, when the Kentar commander's voice crackled over a nearby patrol comm. "They are moving through the sub-level nexus. Lock down cargo bay Delta 4. Intercept immediately." Elias shoved Lyra into a narrow space between two massive plasma cooling units. The walls shook as the heavy blast doors to the bay entrance began to seal shut. They were trapped. The sound of the Kentar boots echoing in the narrow corridor was growing louder, closer. They were going to be cornered, apprehended, and Elias knew the fate for anyone who interfered with the Kentar hegemony would be swift and brutal. Lyra pressed her face into his side, her small body trembling. There was no escape in the maintenance deck. The bay was sealed. All that was left was the vast open space of the cargo hold itself, a death trap filled with sensors and enemy patrols. He looked up, his mind racing, seeing the sheer hopelessness of their situation. There had to be another way. The heavy clank hiss of the cargo bay's blast doors sealing shut was followed by the cold, calculated tread of the Cathar boots entering the corridor behind them. There was nowhere left to run. Elias pulled Lyra deeper into the cramped space between the two plasma cooling units, his body shielding her from view. His fingers instinctively gripped the wrench he kept tucked into his belt, a pitiful weapon against the advanced armor and plasma rifles of the Cathar. His heart hammered a desperate, uneven rhythm against his ribs. He was not going to let them take her. He would fight, not because he could win, but because he couldn't leave her. In that moment of absolute, suffocating dread, Lyra reached up. Her small, four-fingered hand, cold and trembling, touched the side of his neck. She whispered a single rapid series of melodic clicks and trills, the first time Elias had heard her speak. The sound was alien, beautiful, and utterly incomprehensible. It was a language meant for water and stars, not the stale, anxious air of a human service tunnel. She then reached into the folds of her tattered tunic and withdrew a small object. It was not a weapon nor a key. It was a jewel, a masterpiece of alien craftsmanship. The object was a clear, multifaceted crystal, cut into a complex, elegant symbol that Elias could only describe as a stylized six-pointed star, interwoven with flowing liquid lines. It wasn't merely beautiful, it pulsed. A soft, internal golden light shimmered from within the crystal, casting a faint, warm glow over their faces. Lyra gently pressed the object into Elias's palm. The crystal was warm, almost alive. Its warmth was a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped him. He looked down at the object, the royal sigil, the very thing the Cathar commander had prioritized above all else. He looked at her, and she nodded, her silver eyes finally dry, filled now with a heartbreaking mixture of trust and finality. In that simple, silent transfer, she had entrusted him with the ultimate secret of her identity, and perhaps the key to an entire civilization. The question of who is she was replaced by the terrifying realization of what have I just involved myself in. He was holding a piece of galactic high politics, the one thing that could get him killed faster than any blaster fire. The Cathar voices were now directly behind the cooling units, their clicking commands sharp and clear. Search the service bay, check the radiation shields. Their light swept over the wall near their hiding spot. Elias knew the end was seconds away. In a desperate final move, he gripped the crystal tightly in his left hand, and with his right, smashed the nearest emergency control panel. The corridor lights immediately went dark, plunging the service tunnel into absolute suffocating blackness, leaving only the faint ominous glow of the royal sigil and the rising panic of the Cathar. The self-imposed darkness gave them a momentary precious advantage, but it was fleeting. The Cathar were seasoned hunters, and their advanced armor carried its own tactical illumination. A moment later, bright cone-shaped beams of light cut through the blackness, methodically sweeping the corridor. Elias knew he had mere seconds. Using the small internal light from the royal sigil as a guide, he shoved Lyra through a tiny access hatch meant for sensor calibration. He followed her instantly, scrambling into the void between the station's inner and outer hull, a space filled with a confusing tangle of wires, cables, and structural crossbeams. It was a dangerous, silent maze, but it offered cover. The Cathar commander's amplified voice roared through the tunnel intercom. The asset is moving. Lock down the maintenance grids. Find the human collaborator. Elias realized that his identity had been compromised. They weren't just hunting Lyra anymore. They were hunting him. His fear sharpened into cold, desperate focus. He was no soldier, but he was running on pure adrenaline and the primal instinct to protect the small, trusting life clinging to his back. He didn't have to outrun them. He just had to survive long enough to reach the cargo loading bay, which he knew was his only way out. But the Cathar had anticipated this. Alarms blared throughout the sector, and the heavy automated doors leading to the main cargo bay began to cycle down. The metallic grinding sound echoed through the cables around them like the closing jaws of a colossal beast. He was moving at top speed when he saw the glint of an armor plate ahead. A four-person Cathar squad, led by Commander Valerius himself, had cut them off. Valerius was a towering figure even among his species, his movements slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly confident. The net had closed. Elias skidded to a halt, pulling Lyra into the shadow of a colossal humming energy conduit. He was trapped utterly and hopelessly cornered between a rapidly sealing door and a squad of elite alien mercenaries. Valerius paused, his head cocked, his angular visor searching the shadows. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. He knew he had them. A cruel, dry hiss came from his external comms. "Come out, collaborator. Your little secret is over. The price for stealing imperial property is high, but the price for interfering is eternal. Elias could feel Lyra trembling against him. His hand tightened on the useless wrench in his pocket. He stared at the commander, seeing the sheer arrogance of a being who knew, with absolute certainty, that he had won. Elias stepped out from behind the conduit, raising his empty hands in a gesture of surrender. The faint, beautiful light of the royal sigil, which he still clutched tightly in his left hand, was immediately lost in the harsh tactical beams of the Cathar rifles. Lyra remained hidden, pressed deep into the shadows. Valerius, the commander, stepped forward, his massive frame radiating cold contempt. His voice, amplified and sharp, was filled with a mocking disbelief. "The janitor," he hissed, the word a vile insult. "You risked your miserable life, your miserable credits, and your miserable future for a piece of imperial property. Your species is even more sentimental and irrational than our reports indicated." He ordered his soldiers to stand down slightly, savoring the moment of absolute superiority. "Tell me, human, what did this creature promise you? Riches? A new life? Did you truly believe your mop and bucket would save you from the hegemony?" Elias kept his gaze steady, refusing to look away, refusing to show the bone-deep fear that gripped him. He knew any plea for mercy would be ignored. His crime was unforgivable. He had intervened. His existence had become inconvenient to the Cathar Imperium. Valerius stepped closer, his armored foot resting near Lyra's hiding place. "I will enjoy dismantling you piece by piece, collaborator, but first, the asset." He reached a massive, segmented hand toward the shadows. It was at this moment, as the ultimate evil reached for the ultimate vulnerability, that the game completely changed. Lyra emerged from the shadows, not trembling, not crying, but standing with a quiet, terrifying dignity that froze the very air in the corridor. Her small form, standing before the looming might of the Cathar, was a picture of impossible authority. Valerius and his guards paused, momentarily bewildered by her sudden, fearless presence. Lyra spoke. Her voice was no longer a frightened whisper, but a clear, powerful command. The melodic clicks and trills were complex, layered with a resonant power that the Cathar's universal translators immediately recognized and processed. The words she spoke were an ancient, powerful tongue, a language of command known only to the highest echelons of the galactic order. "I am Lyra Vestra, of the sovereign line of the Cerulean Star Empire. By the ancient laws of the Concord, I command you to stand down." The declaration, delivered with the absolute, unquestionable authority of a being born to rule, hit the corridor with the force of a supernova. The reaction was instantaneous, total, and irreversible. The Cathar guards, their advanced systems processing the command's unique authentication codes, immediately dropped their rifles. The sound of metal clattering on the durasteel floor echoed loudly in the sudden silence. They fell to one knee, their segmented heads bowed low in a gesture of absolute non-negotiable deference and terror. Their helmets, now processing the truth, emitted faint, frightened whirs. The sovereign line of the Cerulean Star Empire. Lyra was not just a runaway princess. The Cerulean Empire was the oldest, most diplomatically powerful bloc in the central galaxy, the very organization the Cathar secretly feared, and whose treaties they dared not violate. And the girl standing before them, no older than 8 in human years, was their empress. Commander Valerius was the only one who remained standing, but his massive frame was visibly shaking. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, desperate sweat that coated his clear visor. "The sovereign is deceased. This is a trick, a desperate lie by the collaborator," he roared, trying to cling to his lost authority. Lyra, now Empress Lyra Vestra, merely raised her hand. The royal sigil, the crystal fin held, pulsed with an impossibly bright golden light that was now visible through her palm. The light was her final proof. Valerius finally collapsed to one knee, a defeated clicking sound escaping his mask. The word regent was the last thing he managed to hiss, realizing his coup attempt had failed. He was a dead man walking. Elias, still standing and utterly unnoticed in the sheer magnitude of the political earthquake that had just occurred, felt his mind reel. Janitor, Empress, Sandwich, galactic overthrow. The contrast was so absurd, so vast, that it bordered on the comical. His simple act of kindness had saved the ruler of an entire stellar civilization. Empress Lyra Vestra turned, her gaze falling not on the defeated commander, but on Elias. Her silver eyes, no longer those of a frightened child, but those of a powerful sovereign, were filled with a deep, silent gratitude. She nodded to him, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. The most powerful woman in the central galaxy walked calmly over to the terrified Valerius. She gave a series of rapid commands in her ancient melodic tongue, sealing his fate and the fate of his collaborators. She then turned to her guards, now under her command, and gave a clear, simple order. She pointed at Elias, still clutching the royal sigil. The human will be treated as a member of the sovereign's personal guard. He has my absolute protection. All his desires will be met. Begin the extraction, immediately. The execution of Empress Lyra Vestra's orders was swift and chillingly efficient. The defeated commander Valerius and his remaining loyal guards were disarmed and secured. The security breach was silently contained. The Cathar bodies, including a few who had resisted, were discreetly removed, and the chaos was smoothed over with the cold, expert precision of a massive imperial machine. Elias, still wearing his stained janitor's uniform, was escorted by the now submissive Cathar guards through the station. They treated him not as a collaborator, but as an extension of the Empress herself, their deference absolute and unsettling. A Cerulean shuttle, sleek and impossibly fast, materialized silently in the main cargo bay. It was a vessel of such elegance and advanced technology that it made the Star Chaser look like a child's toy. Elias and Lyra, who was now referred to only as the Sovereign, were ushered aboard. Inside, the shuttle was a haven of soft light and soothing ambient sound. The Empress, her small form now draped in an ornate flowing robe, addressed her newly appointed chief of security, a tall imposing Cerulean named Zerax. Zerax, whose presence alone could probably silence a riot, kept glancing at Elias with an expression of profound, almost comical confusion. After the initial reports were made and the ship was safely in hyperspace, Empress Lyra Vestra dismissed her security detail. She sat across from Elias, the opulent silence of the cabin broken only by the low hum of the warp drive. She was still Lyra, the girl who had cried in the service tunnel, yet she was also the Empress of a massive civilization. She reached out, placing a delicate hand on his arm. She didn't thank him with the formal language of a sovereign. She spoke to him with the quiet intimacy of a friend whose life he had saved. Her silver eyes were filled with the same profound trust he had seen when she handed him the royal sigil. "Elias," she said, her voice a soft melodic whisper, "you gave me your food and your silence when everyone else abandoned me. You risked your life for the girl you thought was nothing more than a lost child. Tell me," Elias, finding his own voice amidst the surreal opulence, shrugged, the movement looking odd in his cleaning uniform. "There wasn't any other choice," he said simply. "You were hungry, you were scared, it's just what you do." His simple human answer, devoid of politics or gain, seemed to fascinate her. She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. This interaction was not a diplomatic exchange, it was a quiet reaffirmation of their bond. A demonstration that the power shift was external, but their relationship remained rooted in that single shared meal. She was now the Empress, but she would never forget the man who treated her, the Empress, like just a hungry child. The Cerulean capital ship, the Starlight Aegis, was a floating city of polished chrome and shimmering light, a testament to technological and political power that dwarfed Titan VII into insignificance. Elias, still wearing his faded janitor's uniform, felt every eye on him as he was escorted through the colossal corridors. He was a stain on the pristine elegance, a jarring human note in a symphony of alien perfection. The guards, diplomats, and high-ranking officials of the imperial court stared at him with expressions ranging from open contempt to utter bewilderment. He was, to them, an embarrassing curiosity, a reminder that their all-powerful empress had been reduced to accepting charity from a low-tier worker. He was led into the grand audience chamber, a breathtaking circular hall where light itself seemed to bend to the empress's will. Empress Lyra Vestra sat upon a throne that pulsed with the light of the central power core. She was no longer Lyra. She was the sovereign, draped in ceremonial robes, a sight of terrifying beauty and authority. The entire court, a dizzying array of alien species in glittering regalia, knelt before her. Elias stood alone, awkwardly near the entrance, his boots scuffing the polished floor. Xerax, the chief of security, approached him with a barely concealed look of frustration. "The sovereign requests you to stand in the position of her personal guard," he hissed, his voice low, "and for the love of the stars, please try not to touch anything." Elias simply shrugged and moved to his assigned spot near the throne, his simple presence a profound act of defiance against all the court's established hierarchy. Empress Vestra began her address, her melodic voice resonating with power. She recounted the events of the attempted coup with cold, clinical detail, naming the traitors and sealing their fate. But then she paused, her silver gaze sweeping across the room until it locked onto Elias. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted. She began to speak of her rescue. She didn't focus on the tactical brilliance of the extraction. She focused on the simplicity of the act. She spoke of a lone human, an insignificant worker, who chose to break every rule of the station, not for profit, but for a single frightened child. The courtiers shifted uncomfortably, the pure, raw emotion of her tale clashing violently with their cold political reality. Elias felt the weight of her words, feeling more exposed than he had when cornered by the Cathar. The ultimate irony was that in this court of power and wealth, his simple failed sandwich was the most valuable offering ever made. The Empress concluded the matter of the coup and turned her attention to Elias. A palpable tension filled the grand audience chamber as she prepared to announce the human's reward. The courtiers leaned forward, expecting an exorbitant sum of credits, a diplomatic post, or perhaps even a quiet, lucrative exile, anything to remove the embarrassing presence of the janitor from the imperial court. Empress Vestra, however, had a more profound understanding of the human heart. She looked not at Elias's uniform, but into the depths of his story. "The human, Elias, asks for no reward," she announced, her voice ringing with clarity. "He performed his duty, the duty of humanity, without expectation of gain. He risked everything for a frightened child. To reward him with mere credits would be to misunderstand the nature of his gift." She paused, letting the silence magnify the anticipation. "Therefore I shall reward him with a task worthy of his spirit. Elias, you are hereby appointed as the sovereign's High Minister of Compassion and Welfare." A collective gasp rippled through the court. The title was unprecedented, unheard of, a direct challenge to the Cyrillian system of rigid bloodline-based hierarchy. "Your mandate," the Empress continued, her eyes shining with new conviction, "is to oversee the establishment of the Imperial Concord's entire network of refugee centers and orphanages. You will implement the Elias Protocol, a doctrine based on the simple, radical human principle that every child has equal worth and deserves equal care, regardless of tier, rank, or species. You will teach my people, and the entire Concord, the power of a single, non-negotiable act of human kindness." The logic was undeniable. His expertise was not in combat, but in care. His qualification was not rank, but his moral character. Elias felt a wave of profound acceptance wash over him. His life, which had been aimless and empty, now had a purpose that extended across the stars. This was not a paycheck, it was a mission that resonated with the deepest echo of his soul. Months later, the grand audience chamber was a distant, surreal memory. Elias stood not in a polished court but in the bustling, cheerful common room of a newly established state-of-the-art imperial orphanage on a reclaimed colony world. He wore a simple, tailored uniform that bore the elegant sigil of his new office. He was surrounded not by haughty courtiers, but by the laughter and chatter of rescued alien children from a dozen different species, all being cared for under the revolutionary Elias Protocol. He was happy. The dull ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion on Titan 7 had vanished, replaced by the profound satisfaction of meaningful work. Empress Lyra Vestra arrived without the usual fanfare. She was simply dressed, having momentarily set aside her ceremonial robes. She walked past the smiling nurses and busy children and found Elias in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of the evening meal. He was making a simplified version of his famous Earth sandwich. Lyra smiled, a genuine warm expression that still held a hint of the frightened girl he had found in the service tunnel. "Minister Elias," she said, her voice soft, "your protocol is working, the children are thriving, Your simple kindness is changing my entire empire's social fabric." Elias chuckled, handing her a freshly made sandwich. "Just making lunch, Your Majesty, but thank you." They sat together at a small, unassuming table, eating the sandwich in comfortable silence. It was a beautiful, full-circle moment, the Empress and the janitor sharing a simple meal, just as they had the first time. Their roles had changed utterly, yet their bond remained rooted in that shared moment of vulnerability and trust. They were more than friends. They were co-architects of a new, kinder empire. As the sun set over the reclaimed alien world, casting a warm glow through the window, Lyra looked at Elias. She was a ruler, but in that moment she was also a friend. She spoke of the future, of expanding the protocol to a dozen more sectors, of the political battles still to be won against the old guard. Elias listened, his eyes bright with purpose. He was no longer running from his past, he was building a future. His life, once an echo of emptiness, was now filled with the profound sound of children's laughter and the warm, quiet certainty that the simplest acts of human kindness were in fact the most powerful force in the entire galaxy.